Welcome to Follow the Medical Record, where healthcare experts give insights into the increasing importance of following a patient's medical record through the health ecosystem with compliance, privacy, security, and efficiency front and center. This podcast is brought to you by MRO and hosted by Don Hardwick, Senior Vice President of Client Relations at MRO. Don has been in the health information management industry for over 40 years and has extensive knowledge of how medical records make their way through the healthcare ecosystem. At MRO, Don is responsible for strategic client engagement programs and overall client satisfaction. To hear from all of MRO's industry experts, be sure to visit mrocorp.com for additional content and to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. Over to you, Don.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Follow the Medical Record. I'm your host, Don Hardwick, and thanks for listening in. You can learn more about me and my special guest today on MRO's website at mrocorp.com and can connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter at MROcorp. I am excited to have Rita Bowen to be speaking about the Sequoia Project and its identifying process and prioritization and collaboration on the most pressing challenges to nationwide health information sharing. As you may recall, Rita is MRO's Vice President of Privacy, Compliance, and HIM Policy. She has many years, and Rita, I'll let you say how many when you in just a minute. Experience in the HIM space and is an industry respected author, speaker, and HIM professional. And as always, it is a pleasure to have you join the show today.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that.
You are welcome. So, Rita, tell us a little bit about what the Sequoia Group is to begin with.
Well, the Sequoia Project and the group of members are basically, it's a membership. So any organization has the opportunity to join the Sequoia Project, but the members that participate have a unique opportunity to guide the future of, interoperability, the whole interoperability community. It is basically a group of volunteers that are serving as conveners to discuss process, inform and format, and also have a sort of a vendor neutral voice. Mickey Topathy, who is the head of the Office of the National Coordinator, was a former member of this group before he became the Office of the National Coordinator Director, and we do provide information there. So it's an excellent group to participate in and to help shape strategy or a technical strategic roadmap for health information exchange, guide interoperability testing programs, and assure continued alignment with the national strategy and engage in implementation at all levels across organizations. We have people from Cerner, we have people from EPIC, we have attorneys that are on this group, and it just helps have a conversation that's realistic, that's not actually driven by any one agenda of an individual or group.
So how did you get involved in this organization?
Well, that's a good question. Well, number one, one of the former owners of, or still one of the owners of MRO, was a member. So he had the foresight to actually join the Sequoia Group in its early days, and had invited me to several of the meetings where I loved participating, because anybody that knows me knows I like to talk and I like to interject on strategic planning and the focus of especially how we use health information, since I've been in it for such a long period of time. So when he stepped away from the group, he suggested that I become more active, and I did. And now I'm on the board of directors. I serve as the treasurer for this group, and I've also served on a couple of the work groups. So the work group that I've spent the most time on is interoperability good practices. There's been data usability, consumer education, defining what should be considered PHI or the designated record set in the electronic world. Because as you know, October 6th, your system should have defined EPHI, and that needs to be made available in some form or format that's agreeable to the patient, to that patient.
So this specific project, if you can elaborate on this and how they will monitor compliance and so forth with the Cures Act, how is that going to be orchestrated?
Well, it'll be orchestrated really by two groups. The Sequoia Project will not be the ones that governs compliance. We have the work group that I participated in on the information blocking compliance task group. We have created some tip sheets and what we call good practices. We didn't want to call them best practices because I don't know that anybody knows a best practice at this point. And those have been circulated at this point, and I can provide you with that website so any listener can listen and actually obtain those to determine if their organization is on the correct path. So it's sequoiaproject.org// the Sequoia Project Information Blocking Compliance draft for feedback on good practices for information blocking. That's a mouthful, so we can get that to you and have it posted. But the compliance actually will be monitored basically by two factors. It depends on what type of actor you are. And if you are a health provider, you may not be subject to civil money penalties. That will be governed by CMS. And to my understanding, CMS has not published how that will be reviewed and what disincentives might be given to healthcare providers. Now, if you are part of a health information network or a developer of an EHR, there are civil money penalties and that could be applied to you, but that's a different group that would be governing that. That would be the information in the Office of National Coordinator that would be looking at that through CMS. So all three groups would have to work together, but to my knowledge, there has been no actions to date because there was delay for information, the interoperability rule because of COVID, and things were pushed back. The information blocking rule, basically, whereby you should not block information. If you can share that information, you shouldn't be blocking it unless it meets one of 8 exceptions, is in effect. And I think there's been 300 complaints to date that have been placed regarding information blocking. And in looking at some of those complaints, some of them are not valid because they're complaints against people who are not actors. So for example, MRO, we're not an actor. So you can't invoke information blocking against us because we're facilitating the release of that information. Interoperability means that the patient or the patient's representative can obtain that information without any manual effort. So without special manual effort, they can go to a portal or they can go to a PC that may be set up for them to use in a facility, and they can obtain the EPHI themselves without any manual effort from a business partner or a vendor that the facility might have.
Most of the EHRs, though, now are and the facilities have an access or portal that patients can obtain their information pretty much 24/7 availability. Are there any penalties for a facility not providing that avenue for patients and their representative, I guess is a better way of putting it?
It's encouraged. There are no penalties if a provider or a facility did not push information to the portal. It's definitely encouraged, but the portal is not mandated. But that seems to be the easiest way for patients to have direct access to their health information. What organizations need to be aware of is if they are giving the rights to providers to restrict the flow of information to the portal, is someone reviewing that restriction to see if it's appropriately met? Did it meet one of the exceptions, or will the facility have a policy that they'll only allow the restricted hold to hold for X number of days and then it's automatically released? So there's workflows that have to be discussed and designed within each organization. Most organizations that I talked to originally started out letting the physicians, determine if they wanted to restrict the flow, and quickly found out that they were restricting the flow too often. So they had to either formulate a committee or create a policy that it would be automatically released at set number of days.
What kind of restrictions are applied here?
Well, often, if a diagnosis, if a physician is, has a test result coming back and they know that this is a detrimental, outcome for the patient, and they haven't had a chance to discuss it, like maybe Huntington's disease, if that showed up on the portal and the patient saw that and they started Googling it, which most patients would do, or, they'd talk to someone and they could go down a rabbit hole that, would lead to their demise. And so they may go, oh, well, I'm going to die anyway. Or they may see a diagnosis of cancer, but may not understand that there's good news and bad news, that there's a slow growing cancer and it's capsulated and they're going to be able to take it out through surgery, and it's not going to be going out to their lymph nodes. Cancer doesn't always mean death. And that's the kind of thing that many physicians like to have, that one-on-one conversation with their patients before they just see something and then have a reaction that's maybe unnecessary. So that organization has to have those workflows worked out. Some that I know already have diagnoses that just automatically will go on hold to allow the physician X number of days to talk to the patient. Some allow the physician to classify it as the information is going over, that they want it to be on hold for X number of days.
So is HIM the gatekeeper on monitoring access and these restrictions?
Often they are, but they may not be the sole group that's doing it. It should be a collaborative effort between, your clinical staff, your HIM staff, your IT department. You definitely need to have someone that truly understands the information governance of how information is entered into the system and where it's flowing to and how it goes out of your system. So I encourage all of my HIM peers to be taking an active part in this discussion. And if they had not been actively involved, to walk right on into the room and sit down at the table and say, hey, I have something to offer. Because health information management professionals are the unique group that truly understands how information is created, where it's being created at, and how it's going into the record and how it's flowing out and how it's being used. I'll give you an example. When I was still at an organization as an enterprise director, they implemented a new system for obstetrics, and therefore in our neonatal unit, since they were documenting in there, we started getting denials for payment. And they came to me and they said, you must be coding something wrong. And I was like, I don't think so, but let's look at it. So we started looking at it and pulling the thread back. Well, what was happening was that at discharge, when the baby was discharged, they were letting the birth weight drop off, and they were letting the weight at discharge flow over to billing. Therefore, it didn't look like they needed to be in a neonatal unit. So it needed to be the birth weight that flowed, not the discharge weight. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about from an interoperability standpoint. If you're going to have information flowing, you have to know what is the source of truth and what data point will be that source of truth and where it's flowing to and how it's used.
Makes complete sense. On the restrictions, and hospitals don't want to restrict, okay? Their objective is to provide the information quickly and accurately to the sources that need that information for continuity of care, or in some cases here, of course, the patient's own personal needs, whether it's for continuation of care or just for their own information purposes. When hospitals are setting up those conduits for accessibility by the patients or their personal representative, is the information that they're being provided, is that mostly test results, or does it go beyond test results?
It goes beyond test results, because if you're providing information to the patient or their personal representative based off of a patient or a patient-directed request, you are pulling information from the designated record set. So that's more, it includes any conversation or any form of information that was used to make a decision about that person's health care or the payment of that claim. So it's more broader than just test results.
And how will compliance of accessibility and interoperability, how will that be monitored? How will that be, I guess, for a facility to make sure that they are in compliance? How will that be orchestrated from an administrative standpoint with governing bodies?
Well, like with any governing bodies, for even for HIPAA, the basics of HIPAA, it all was based off of a complaint was made, and if HHS received that complaint and they felt that it was warranted investigation, they would come and investigate. As I said, there's already been 300 complaints that I'm aware of on information blocking, but not all of those are validated, because some of them were complaints against people who are not actors. So you couldn't, like I said, MRO can't block information. We're not your EHR. Your EHR vendor is the one that has to certify that the information is flowing to the portal, and to allow them, if they're going to use other devices or an API for the patient to connect to. So one of the things that I encourage when I've been talking to my peers is that, I know we rely a lot on the portals, but to have the information stated on the portal, if you are looking for something that is not on, that you are specifically needing something and you do not see it via the portal through your direct access, to notify someone, to notify the compliance officer, to notify the HIM director, so they can help facilitate that. Because as long as you're helping to facilitate providing that information to the patient in the form and format that they choose, you can avoid a complaint. But not providing an opportunity to reach out to someone could result in a complaint being filed. And this will be complaint driven, is my understanding.
So really, if it's complaint driven, then compliance to the program is going to be reactive rather than monitored on an ongoing basis by some measure from a governing body out there. So a complaint would be lodged, and then the facility's compliance surrounding that lack of information being provided then would be measured against how they respond to that complaint.
True. Now, I think any organization should be proactive and looking at this, and what I often suggest is create like a secret shopper, create someone that that's trying to get this information and see if they can. So test it to make sure it's working. So call it a secret shopper, call it however you want to call it, but I think that's probably one of the best ways to be proactive about it for an organization, because it is going to be sort of a knee jerk to a complaint, more from a federal level. And it will be imperative that, if you have denied access to someone for a legitimate reason and they file a complaint, that you have good documentation to that discussion as to how you vetted it and reviewed the appropriate information blocking categories, because information blocking can be approved and allowed if it meets one of those 8 exceptions. So that's why the documentation of that is so important, and having a group that is vetting it, so that it's not just one person saying no. And every one of those exceptions have to be vetted on its own merits. In other words, you can't say, well, 3 weeks ago we did this and we said it met this exception, so it's going to meet it now. No, each one has to be reviewed as it's being applied to determine if it's applicable or not.
Makes complete sense. For our listeners to obtain those 8 exceptions, can you, Rita, put that up on our website, or have that up on our website? That might be very helpful to our listeners, so they can see the documentation and the exceptions surrounding access. We're all consumers of the healthcare environment. At some stage in our life, we're going to be consumers. And we want to be able to have access to our records and information for various reasons as a result of that consumption of healthcare resources. So it's not a them, it's a us.
That's true.
Always with this, and the older I get, the more this starts to become important to me. Rita, is there anything else that our listeners, from your standpoint, would benefit from that we haven't covered here?
The only other thing that, and I will encourage, and we'll put this up on our website too, we are going to have a webinar shortly on just the privacy updates, because with the reversal of Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs case, that has interjected some state laws preventing the flow of certain information regarding women's reproductive health information. So definitely going to have to stay alert to that, specifically to the state that you are residing in, and or if you are sharing information to a health information exchange that may cross state lines. So more to come on that, because that's going to be an ever-evolving process as we move forward.
Yeah, good point. There are things that change for various reasons that have a ripple effect and impact healthcare and the information surrounding that care that continuously pop up, and that is one of them. Most definitely, that's going to have an impact. So, Rita, once again, I want to thank you for joining the show. I don't have any further questions here. I really do appreciate your time and carving time out of your busy schedule. And I'm sure our audience appreciates your insight.
Well, one more plug. I want to just encourage those listeners that may be attending AHIMA in Columbus, Ohio this fall. I will be doing a panel discussion and opening for Q&A with some peers on interoperability. One being Steve Gravely, who will be there as an attorney to answer some of our legal questions. And I also have a representative from both Epic and Cerner joining me. So I do encourage those that are able to join that either virtually or in person. Look forward to seeing everybody.
Thank you, Rita. We really appreciate it. So in closing out today, Rita hit on a couple of interesting items, and one other avenue here for you to consider is if you know someone that's looking for a great career path in a flourishing industry covering these topics and other topics that we discuss on the show, please have them reach out to our website and feel free to have them contact us at MROCORP.com. Also, be sure to check us out on the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Finally, don't forget to reach out on Twitter. Until we talk again, I'm your host, Don Hardwick.